Firstly, I'd like to welcome you all to the fourth webinar in our Talking Talent Acquisition series. I'm Charlie Wood, your host for today and head of the Contract Solutions Division at Head Resourcing, a specialist IT change and digital recruitment agency where I've been working for the past 19 years. It's my pleasure to also introduce Lindsay Winter, Head of Talent at Avidity, who will be delivering today's webinar, How Collecting the Right DE&I Data Can Help Shape Your Talent Acquisition Strategy. Now, for those of you who don't know her, Lindsay has a broad range of experience in talent acquisition, recruitment, careers, talent development, employer branding, early careers, diversity, equity, inclusion practices, and organisational and cultural development. Now with Avidity, Lindsay was previously a talent acquisition strategy manager and senior manager within careers and diversity and inclusion at Virgin Money. Lindsay is passionate about creating and contributing to cultures that are inclusive, progressive, and allow people to thrive, and we're really excited to welcome her along today. Before I hand over to Lindsay, there's just a couple of housekeeping points to go through. The session will last for approximately 45 minutes. Lindsay will deliver her talk for about 15 of those, and there'll be a Q&A session where we'll take as many of your questions as time allows. If you can please use the Q&A box to ask those questions. You can also use the thumbs up icon to upvote any questions you're particularly keen to hear the answer to. Also, feel free to get involved using the chat function, which if you select it should appear on the right-hand side. And lastly, the recording will be available over the next couple of weeks on YouTube. You'll get a notification once it's in there. Now, before we jump into Lindsay's presentation and our questions and yours, let's get a sense of the sentiment in the virtual room with some quick fire polls just to see where everybody is with regards to DE&I at the moment. You will have 10 seconds to respond to each of the polls. So buttons on mice. So do you currently collect candidate DE&I data? So yes, no, or plan to soon. Yes and no, evenly matched, and yeah, plan too soon. So yeah, good split there. Do you use colleague DE&I data to inform your talent acquisition strategy? So plenty of would like tos, a couple yes, and a few no. Okay. And lastly, do you currently work towards any DE&I targets? So do you currently? So majority have no targets in place, and a couple would like to. That's perfect. Right, with that done, it's my pleasure to hand you over to Lindsay.
Awesome, thank you so much, Charlie. So excited to be here today. I'm just going to move on to my next slide. There we go. Just to give you a little bit about me and why we're here today. I do want to caveat this session with a couple of things. One, we're going to be talking a little bit about data collection. I just want to say, just so I'm not legally impacted in any way, shape or form, there are certain rules and regulations around this. So definitely make sure before you embark on anything that you're comfortable with that, you've checked with your relevant data protection teams or equivalent in your organisations, and they do vary by jurisdiction. So just worth flagging with that. And also what I wanted to do today was share some of my experiences, and I think it's really important to acknowledge when you're talking about anything in the DE&I space, just that recognition that I'm talking from my position of personal experience, which might be really different to other people's. So just a couple of things I really wanted to share today. So Charlie's given a much nicer sort of whistle-stop tour of my career than I could remember, but it was roughly, I think, around 20-ish years, which is weird because I'm only 25, that I've spent doing this type of work. The majority of my time has been within financial services. I've worked a little bit in the charity sector, and now in my current role with Avidity in the sales and marketing industry. So I've spanned quite a lot of different organisations. Within those roles that I've had, I've probably had about 10 years plus where I've had some form of DE&I focus to my role. So whether that's supporting attraction approaches, actually working to and creating DE&I strategies, or contributing to colleague and culture causes, that's been a big part of what I do. And I think lots of us that have been in the TA industry for a while are starting to see that become a much more prevalent part of our role. I've also, it's fair to say, experienced organisations on both ends of the scale. So in terms of how we've collected data, how we use it, so really similar to the poll there. So it was really interesting to see what you guys are going through just now. I've been involved in organisations where there's really sophisticated and mature plans in place, and organisations where they're at the very start of the journey. And what I'm hopefully going to be able to do today is share some of my experiences with you that might help at all those different points that you're on. I've also worked with a lot of external partners over the years to get insight and feedback from different communities, and I don't think that's something that should be overlooked or missed if you're embarking on doing some of this work, or you're thinking about, how you go out to market, how you might use DE&I data. The insight that you can get from really critical organisations, charities, partners, etc., is really important, and I'm really happy to pick up people separately on ones that I would definitely recommend in this space. So I would also say I stole Ewan's idea of pinching all the logos of the organisations I've worked to along the side. I was going to include some pictures of myself, but I'm not as sporty as he is, and most of mine had a glass of wine or cocktail in hand, so I decided against that. But if Ewan's on, thank you for the inspiration. I guess, why are we here, right? So this is the fourth, I think, in these sessions of some really big topics that we've been talking about. And I think, one of the things from my perspective is, if we want to be able to be in a position where we're really influencing the TA industry and we're thinking really differently about how we, are progressive and moving it forward, we have to go back to basics in some of those things. So as always, I wanted to start with why. So I went to a reliable source, hopefully, of PwC, just to get that kind of definition of why would we start collecting this type of data. So according to PwC, the purpose of collecting diversity data is to understand the composition of your workforce, identify inequalities, and develop initiatives to promote inclusion and diversity, which all sounds really easy when it's all in one sentence, right? So what I wanted to do in the next sort of 10 minutes is kind of show you some of the things that I've done to do that. So key things to call out here around data sourcing and collection methods. Everyone is at their own point in this journey, but starting is probably the most important thing. There's loads of ways for you to collect data. There's lots of different methods you can use. And I just wanted to call out some of the ones that I've used and why I think they've been particularly useful. So first one that hopefully you can get access to is around colleague feedback. And why is that important? Your colleague feedback is direct, right? That's your people who are living and breathing your culture and your organisation. You can get insights around their experiences. I would suspect most companies do things like some sort of engagement or survey, and that can tell you a lot around your culture. It can tell you a lot around inclusion, and it can help you think about what you need to do moving forward. Colleague data collection is slightly different. It's nuanced here. Lots of organisations will ask you to create a data profile. I'm doing this just now with Avidity, where we're looking at what do we know about our colleague base. So what can we ask colleagues? What would we like to know, and what we're going to do with it? And that's really important that you're clear about that and that you articulate that message. But we've built out some questions around things like ethnicity. Obviously, we have gender in there, which would be a legal requirement for pension-related activity. We also now ask around religion, we ask around sexual orientation, and we ask around social mobility is the next one that we're going to be putting in. And you'll see down the side, I've called out some of the ones that you would normally see, and disability as well. So we're building up a profile slowly but surely of our colleague data. Our response rate on that is it's ever increasing. I've worked in a number of organisations where response rates have varied from anything from like 20% to 85%. But response rate itself and lack of response is sometimes telling you something as well. So you can think about how you might be able to get your hands on that data if it doesn't sit in your space, but how you can think about the articulation of using that data to then allow you to understand where the gaps in your organisation sit. The key thing for me, and where I found that we've had the most progress and been able to shape things most in terms of actual marketing, employer branding, message out into the external talent market, is around applicant data. So I've done this a couple of times now, where as part of the application process, front-ended a completely voluntary survey for applicants to give us a little bit of detail about their profile and background. And that helps us on a couple of things. So it helps us identify, are our attraction methods working? So are we actually reaching out to the people that we want to? Are we being inclusive in that? Are we contacting candidates in a number of underrepresented communities? Do we need to change the way that we do that? That's been a really critical one, and one that's definitely helped. Also helps you track through that journey. So for example, we were able to, in previous roles I've had, dig down into that detail to understand, well, actually, maybe we are attracting a really representative applicant group, but when it comes to interview, for example, we're not then seeing those results flow through into our colleague data. So does that mean that we need some sort of intervention, maybe some training, maybe some support for interviews? What does that look like? And if you can get that front end data, it really allows you to help make those sorts of decisions and actually potentially put in interventions and support mechanisms for your business. Colleague engagement data is another key one. This one's really important for a couple of reasons. One, because you want to understand how colleagues feel and what the sentiment of your organisation is. But two, it's also a really strong employer brand tool. So lots of organisations, and ourselves included, who've got really strong engagement data will talk about that in external sources. So for example, on your career site, in LinkedIn posts, in other social posts that you might do. But it really understanding and getting those metrics and bringing them to life for talent is really important. And it also allows people to sort of recognize, this culturally might be an organization I want to be part of. I feel I can be myself here, I can thrive, I can do well. So again, if you can utilize that data through your talent messaging, it tends to work really well with your external applications. And also then looking at things like progresses against targets reported. If any of you are working in industries where you have to do regular reporting, so within financial services, for example, some of the professional services, you might have targets that you share, you might share that externally, and you track and monitor your progress against that. Again, we know that people look for this type of information when they're thinking about who they're going to work for. It matters particularly to Gen Z and those entering the workforce at the moment. We know people are looking at organisations' genuine commitment to being more inclusive, to being more socially conscious and aware. So again, if you can use that in your external talent messaging, again, it's something that might help you drive some applications and drive applications from a broad range of communities. Couple of other things in terms of the reporting space that are really helpful, and ones that I've personally used to usually shape messaging or be able to look at how we might want to adapt styles. So third-party reporting, again, some industries will be much more invested in this than others, and it will be expected. But there's some really nice opportunities here to use things like media coverage to help look at thinking around your narrative, to think about what you want to share externally. There's lots of reports that will showcase employers, particularly ones that are doing very well, that have progressed, that have maybe had particular initiatives. So again, in terms of your external talent message and demonstrating that you are an inclusive organisation and culture, looking at what that third-party reporting could be. Things like pay gap reporting as well. Gender pay gap, I know that the legislation didn't go through on ethnicity pay gap reporting, but new government, who knows, things could change. Being able to share that and being able to have that as a resource for new hires, I think is really important. I certainly looked at that. Certainly something that I've had feedback from with senior hires that I've dealt with in particular, who've gone to look at pay gap reporting, and also then the action plans that sit behind it. So, how are companies aiming to reduce the gap? Again, it's a really critical attraction tool. And I think it also just demonstrates that intent and that drive in an organisation and a culture. And then there's other third-party reports that are really specific to industry that might look at benchmarking and industry comparison. So the Women in Finance Charter is a really good example of that. And that's one that I've certainly used in the past. It's one where we've showcased some of the work that I've done in other organisations, and we've been able to use that and direct people to that through things like our careers site, and through our broader corporate sites. Again, people really interested to see what your efforts are there. So that's a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully some ideas in there around where you can actually get some of the data and some of the collection methods that might be, available to you. All of those then need to be turned into making it useful and something that you can do with it. And I'll go on to that in a moment, but just as a kind of initial starting point, or maybe you hadn't thought of some of those, or maybe could dig deeper into some of those, these are definitely the ones that I would recommend and have used quite regularly. You'll see down the side here, I've listed out some of the areas that we will collect data on. This is an evolving space. Some people will collect more, some people will collect less, some people have certain restrictions. So again, some examples of things, you might not be collecting all of this. You might have been thinking about what your current organisation does and where you want to see the opportunity to do more. Again, just some ideas of other things that gives you a much fuller picture of your organisation, which then helps you consider what next for them. So how do we make that useful? So again, from my perspective and from the few years that I've been involved in this, I kind of tried to distill this into kind of a handful of things. I sort of failed because I got to 6, but I think there's 6 core areas here that as a TA function you can really influence by having the data and insights to support your strategy. So number 1, if you can identify your gaps. So knowing your starting point is absolutely critical. It helps you think about attraction, it helps you think about how you source talent. And the key things here that I would recommend that you look at are, thinking about your advertising approaches, how you manage your messages in the external market, how you can, plan appropriately to hire. I've done some work in the past where when we knew what the gaps were in terms of we maybe didn't have enough representation for women in senior positions, for example, we could actually do another level of analysis where we could say, okay, if we wanted to get to that point, how many people would we need to hire if we retained everybody? How many people would we need to hire if we retained 90% of our current population, and so on and so forth? So you can actually get into some real modelling and sort of detailed planning if you know this information. And then it allows you to think about, right, if we know that this is what we want to do, where do we advertise? Who do we partner with? What's our approach to that? And I would always encourage you to try and be as intersectional as possible if you're going to do any of that kind of work. Human beings aren't necessarily binary things. People tend to, straddle lots of different communities and groups. So always try and keep options open when you do that sort of stuff. But definitely knowing where you're starting from allows you to then plan to where you want to get to, but always bake in that there'll be some potential attrition or change in numbers, change in circumstances there. How you think about supporting your goals and targets. So lots of organisations will have specific targets these days, and I know some people love them, some people hate them, but if you have got a target, and often people will say, well, the first thing we need to do if we've got a target on X is we need to do more recruitment. I wouldn't share that sentiment. I would say it's part of it, it's part of a solution, but it's really good to know with clarity what it is that you're going to work towards. So the key things here for me, and where I've probably, alongside the recruitment piece, seen some added value that TA functions can do, is look at things like your internal mobility approaches. So we all know, we've all been there, where you've done the hard work up front, and then you get somebody or a group of people, a new intake of people into a business, and then 5 people resign and leave, and then you sort of feel like you're back to the beginning again. So those two things have to go hand in hand. I think it's really important to look at your retention approaches. Are you being mindful of how you think about your top talent? Working with talent management teams if it's not something that sits in your remit, just so that you're not undoing that good work that's happening at the front end. But retention, internal mobility, and potentially looking at things like the use of the apprenticeship levy. So, for example, if you were thinking about targets or goals around social mobility, there's lots of opportunities in both areas of the UK in terms of England, Scotland and Wales, in terms of being able to think about how you could use that levy differently. So could you do something that nicely aligns to a social mobility piece, but also brings in some early talent, some early careers talent into your business? Measuring progress is really important. And the old saying, what gets measured gets done. it can be difficult to get buy-in at first, if you want to start measuring some of your DE&I activity, and it can be tricky to understand sort of where to start. My advice would be to go right down to the very beginning of everything and start with your applicant piece. It allows you to understand where you're attracting people from today. It allows you to pivot, change, think about where you might want to take different routes in terms of your advertising, your socials. You might want to look at your employer brand to see if you need to make any changes there. But if you can get the starting point being your applicant piece, and then start to follow it through the life cycle, follow it through your recruitment journey, how are you able to put those measures in to understand that if you're being more representative at the front end, at the top of the funnel, is it coming all the way through for you? But if you can start to get that data and measure that, then it does allow you to then be able to say to your business, to say to your hiring managers and the people, your key stakeholders you're working with all the time, we need to change something, or we can see a problem, and as I mentioned before, potentially put in intervention. The other thing for me, where I think you've got a real opportunity here, is to inform policy and change. I think there's been a lot of work done in the last few years, particularly in the DE&I space and policy. If we cast our minds back a few years ago with the start of really doing some really good work around menopause. We've got a lot of work going on into the carers space just now. All of that is purely informed by policy, but that policy change is all informed by the data and the insights. For you guys as well as TA, that's certainly something that then becomes really, really critical in terms of your employer brand and your external message. So having, really innovative, progressive, culturally inclusive policies will help in terms of how you recruit, how you attract, and how you inform candidates during that process. So, I would say definitely aim to be involved in those conversations if you can. You want to make sure that your approaches are inclusive by design, so the policies that sit behind them are totally critical to that. If you're a policy owner of your own recruitment policy, it's probably worth reviewing that to make sure that you are aligning it to any other good work you're doing. And it also can help you with things like your referrals and internal mobility policies if you have those as well. So knowing what's happening, knowing in terms of your attraction methods and what the makeup is of the people that are engaging with your brand and that are coming into your organisation, that are being, adding to your culture in that way, will really help with your discussions around that. The next one's around links to performance. So there's a really well-known link between organisations that are more diverse and improve performance, thanks to McKinsey. So we know that that's there. On the next slide, I've actually included a few sort of reference points for anyone that's interested. McKinsey have kind of developed that thinking over the years, so they continue to maintain that that's the case. I would say it's absolutely true. The more diversity of thought you bring to your business, the more likely you are to be much more engaged and successful. I think where you've got this link to performance is so critical if you can consider things like succession planning and talent management, where things I've done in the past here that have really helped us drive this. For example, things like career sponsorship programs, where we've maybe worked with certain groups within businesses to develop a program where they've been able to get additional insight to the business. They've had senior leader sponsors. They've been able to really drive their skills and really focus on what they want to do from a career perspective, and have that kind of accelerated experience of being able to really focus on career and develop themselves and think about how they might be ready for the next move. We've done this a couple of times. I've done it most recently with colleagues from an ethnically underrepresented community and disability community, and on both occasions we had a number of people that were promoted or secured other roles. In fact, over 50% in both different cases. So it's a really positive way to drive change and to drive your business performance. And then lastly, it positively impacts culture. So, it's well documented that, your organisation, as diverse as it is and representative as it is, will have a more positive culture. That's much more likely to mean that you've got an engaged colleague base. It means that you're able to see growth within your organisation. It means that you've got a really positive story to share from an external messaging perspective. It also means that you're more likely to have things like employee resource groups, be able to drive referrals. Again, that's another way, a tool that potentially it can sometimes be underlooked, to work with your ERGs if you've got them, and ask them to drive referrals if they've got, people that are likely to want to come and work for your organisations. That's one that I've certainly used in the past a few times, and it has helped us to be way more representative in certain groups as well. But ultimately, all of these things are going to help you have a more positive culture. You're going to attract the people that you want to attract. Hopefully they're going to be high performing, and you're going to have a really great story to share externally when you're back through the loop again to attract talent. Last slide, you'll be pleased to know. Here are the links that I was talking about. So McKinsey, definitely worth a read. PwC are always good in this space. I've included a couple of bits around the legalities in collecting data. So People Management had a good link on this, and we'll make sure that these are shared with you. Gartner do some really good research on this that's available and free to people. And Stonewall do Ask, Do Tell. Stonewall have a really nice resource guide if you are starting to collect data from the LGBTQ+ community. They've got some really nice guidance on how to shape questions and to think about how you might want to position things, just so that you are, A, going to get people to respond, and B, do so in the right way. A couple of just things of consideration, just over the years I've kind of, I suppose, experienced. Obviously, DE&I data is voluntary, so do be prepared for varying data sets. You might also find that some communities prefer to share more than others, so just be aware that that can happen. You should always give people a prefer not to say response. That tells you quite a lot. Don't sort of discount those responses. Prefer not to say can potentially indicate something else that you might want to consider. It might be around how you've articulated something if it's in an external setting, or it could be around situation or scenario if it's internal. Language and terminology evolves over time, so keep on top of your question sets and regularly review them. There are certain words that we wouldn't use now that we would have maybe used 5-10 years ago. So do keep close. And again, that's where partners like Stonewall, for example, are really helpful for that. I have mentioned it once and I'll mention it again, just the data collection and retention legislations for the countries you're in, for example, GDPR, just, be really aware of what you're collecting and that you're able to do so. And also just be mindful of any disclosure rules and explaining why you're collecting data, and you might need to update things, so privacy notices, colleague fair processing. But as long as you're explaining and articulating to people why you're doing it, you should probably be on relatively solid ground. I've spoken for a good few minutes there, Charlie, so I'm going to pause and allow you back in to see if you've got any questions or thoughts or comments, and I shall stop sharing.
No worries at all, Lindsay. No, that was excellent. Thanks very much for that. So we do have a few questions. We'll just kick off with the first one. I think there are a couple of questions in the Q&A section that seem linked. They seem very similar. So how do we encourage employees to provide diversity data was the first one. Have you got any hints and tips on that?
Yeah, so things I've done in the past, and we're actually just about to embark on this, is using internal comms, encouraging people why it's important. I was just explaining to Charlie, I was at some people roadshows in the last couple of weeks where I got to meet, I'm new into my role, about 10 weeks in, so I got to meet lots of people for the first time. And we were talking about this very point. And we were saying, we totally get if you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's absolutely fine. But if you do, what you can share with us allows us to shape things. It allows us to look at the policies we have. It allows us to look at processes. It also helps with some really simple things like reasonable adjustments. It might help us think about, how we engage with you, tools and technologies and stuff like that. The other thing that we did mention last week was so important is there's lots of people in our business who've been in the business a long time but maybe moved around from division to division. Things change, so what you put into that system on day one versus where you are year 3 could be really different, and life changes and life happens. So I would recommend comms, having a good comms plan, an encouragement piece, maybe tie it into some other messaging. So certainly in the past, we've maybe launched something like an update to an HR system and reminded people to do it at that time. So yeah, there's lots of little ways, but comms, and probably quite regularly, like an annual thing,
Yeah.
because you'll have people moving through your business, and like I say, life changes and things move on.
So making it regular and highlighting the value, how you're
Exactly.
using it,
Yeah.
and how it can benefit.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. There's a question in from Emma. Is there a good place to find to be able to find benchmarks?
Yeah, it will depend on your industry. I think the starting point is usually census data. So the census will probably, the data will give you a really good high level view of the whole of the UK. So there was a little bit of a delay with Scotland's submitted their census data late because of COVID, but I think that's now caught up from memory. But it allows you to have a look at generally across the population what you should, what the community makeup is like. Therefore, broadly, you want your business, do you want, question mark, do you want your business to look like that? But that's certainly the starting point that I've used in a couple of employers and organisations just now, where we've used that as a starting point. Now, there might be some geographical challenge depending on where you are in the country, but I would start there and then kind of work it up.
Grand. Excellent stuff. And Sarah has popped a question in. Have you got any practical examples of where data has helped to create more equity or level the playing field in the recruitment process?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say probably um, probably a couple of things. One, getting that applicant data analysis is critical. So in the most recent, most recent organisation, we probably had about 50% applicant data submission, which is a decent number when you think about how many
Yeah.
people apply to your organisation annually, right? So that allowed us to understand, okay, where are we maybe not seeing our applications from, and where do we need to? And what became evident through that, and through some feedback that we got, so back to that kind of interview and colleague feedback piece, was that actually our interview question set maybe wasn't as inclusive for people who are neurodivergent. So because we had used a values-based approach to interviewing, it was
Yeah.
quite open questions, which you would want, but maybe too open in some cases. So we partnered with a charity, it was National Autism Scotland, and we got some feedback from them to say, could you take a look at these for us? We had this bit of feedback. We can see that the data's showing us that we're maybe not getting as many applications as we would like. And they gave us some brilliant feedback in tightening up those questions, helping with some guidance, and helping us think about how we articulate to those that maybe are neurodivergent, whether they've told us or not. It just made it an easier and more pleasant interview process in that
Yeah.
regard for those people.
Fantastic. And you saw a difference as a result.
Yeah,
That's good.
exactly. Yeah.
In terms of how companies can ensure they're actually collecting accurate data, is there anything you would recommend is in place for that side of things?
So look, it's a tough one, right? Because you're relying on people telling you what they want to tell you. I mean, how you ask the questions and pre-populate usually it's a drop down, answers, is probably your first port of call to make sure that you're comfortable with that. I try and stay away from free text because that's maybe not going to help you. You're just going to end up with a load of stuff, and reporting will be trickier. So really think about your question sets, think about what your drop down options would be, but keep on top of it and keep an eye on it, because it can be really easy to think, oh gosh, 18 months can disappear like that, right? And you think, I've actually not gone back to look at that. And thinking changes, language changes. So actually people might then feel less comfortable responding because it doesn't fit with kind of maybe how they're thinking and feeling about something. Again, that's where the partnership bit for me is really helpful, because people can give you some good guidance. Lots of organisations do it on on their websites. They have resource tools and stuff like that, so you can go into that and get it. But it's the question set and having up-to-date responses are probably the key things there to start you off, I'd say.
Excellent stuff. And moving on to some of the challenges and solutions. So In terms of common challenges for organizations collecting DE&I data and how to overcome that, what are the challenges that you've seen in actually collecting it?
Yeah, so I think first of all, people doing it, right? So people actually sharing, um, or people maybe only sharing like one thing, rather than a full picture. And that's everyone's right. You know, this is very personal, sensitive data, so you have to respect that. So you have to be comfortable working with a bit of variance, and it's almost that kind of, you know, you bake into it. There's a little bit of I suppose nuance in how you're going to share it. You need to be comfortable with the fact that you've not going to have a full picture. So that's probably the first thing to kind of when we talk about it, we're like, oh, I want to know everything and everything minute, and you're just not going to, right? So I think you kind of have to get comfortable with that thought. I think also people are probably very guarded around their information and data, and rightly so. You know, we're constantly telling people to be mindful of identity theft and sharing information and all that good stuff. So that, back to the previous point about telling people why you want it,
Yeah.
really helps with that disclosure. I think also probably a bit of patience. Like, you're not, you know, if you suddenly launch a survey or a questionnaire or something, it's going to take months and months and months to build up, so you've got a decent data set to actually start doing things with. So maybe having a kind of threshold in mind of when you get to that point, yes, we can start making some decisions. And that could be where you advertise or a policy, right? It could be, you know, any end of those sort of spectrums. But it's yeah, knowing that it's going to take a while to get it is probably another thing, and that can be tricky because you want to do things quickly. You might have a gut feel and start to see a trend that allows you to sort of shape thinking, but you know, it probably could take you a good couple of quarters to get some good data in.
And once you've got that data, so you mentioned that, you know, the analysis and utilization side of things, how do you go about that in the organizations you've worked with previously?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what you're trying to solve for, right? So the first things that I've always done is looked at, again, you know, looking at things like ONS data, and saying, okay, so where are we against that? Kind of like roughly how are we performing? Okay, what's that telling us? Because broadly, it's going to tell you something quite early on. So it's going to tell you you've got, you know, not enough people from X here, Y, you know, Y there, whatever. You might be having to look at it through the lens of, for example, gender pay gap reporting, where you're looking at very specific groups in your
Yeah.
organisation, or it could just be we want to get to a certain point. Targets are hard because everyone will have a different reason for a target. It could be, you know, it could be linked to you know, other initiatives you're running in your business. It could just be that you know, you feel like you're woefully behind the curve in terms of your industry or whatever. But what I've certainly done in the past is look at, right, where are we today? Where's your end goal? Is that 10 years away? Is it 5 years away? Is it 3 years away? And then you can look at plotting to get to that point. The challenge, though, and lots of organisations will probably be at this point, particularly on gender and gender splits, the challenge is maintenance as well, right? So you can't just say,
Yeah.
you know, okay, we've got a 50-50 board or whatever your stat is, you know, the magic number you're going after, because sometimes in those circumstances, one or two people make a really big difference. So
Yeah.
maintaining it and ensuring that's where the retention and the internal mobility and the link to performance piece comes in, because we all know the hard work that goes in at the front end, but it's as much hard work, you know, retaining great people as well. So there is that sort of piece about being mindful on that. The other thing I would say, just on the gender piece and the 50-50 split, I would just always caution on that and just consider, are you leaving space for those that don't identify as male or female? So, you know, do you have a different approach to how you split that? That's something that we've done previously as well. So I can never remember the maths. It's like 45-55, and then there's some space for people that maybe don't
Yeah.
identify in that way, so that you've got that opportunity to also be represented and seen at senior levels.
Excellent. And do you have any tips on how to get a wider organization to understand the importance not only of collecting the DE&I data, but also to then use the data effectively and determine actions, develop strategy, and build out a clear narrative?
I mean, you could link it to bonus, right? So
Yeah,
you could do
it's
that.
a persuasive.
I'm being naughty. No, you could. I think it's about what you're going after, though, right?
Yeah.
So it's
What's the end
what
result
do
that
you,
you want?
yeah, what type of organization do you want to be? How's it going to positively impact your culture? How are you, going to be, where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years as an organization? I think the narrative and the storytelling is so important. I think the understanding of the links to high performing cultures and diversity of thought and diversity of representation is really important. I think the good old McKinsey report about increasing profit is always really helpful as well.
Yep.
If you're having that conversation. So there are some sort of real sort of stakes in the ground that you can hang your hat on, but performance is going to be one. Increased profit that is linked to that, obviously. Culturally better organization, more attractive on the market. But yeah, you can link it to senior performance, right? You can absolutely do that, because I'll be honest, where it's done really well, it's if you have got senior leadership buy-in, 100%.
Yes, yeah, having that backing from the top down.
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic stuff. We've got time for one more quick one. So, not a quick one, but in terms of future trends,
Yes.
what do you see as future trends for the use of DE&I data for talent acquisition specifically?
So I think there's probably a couple of things here. I think we will see more focus on social mobility. I think we will see, I think we're just starting to see why that's important and what the impacts of that can be. I think it's very traditionally sat in an early careers, early talent space, and I think we're seeing that open up across broader TA thinking. And then I think we have to say, I nearly did the whole session without it, but AI. I do think we're going to have to think about biases within AI,
Yep.
and how that could potentially influence, and more of us are turning to those tools to think about how we write something, create something, how we might pull data in, push data out. So I do think there's probably something around us all being comfortable with AI, and I think it probably just highlights the fact that it's a co-pilot to us as a TA function. It's not going to take all our jobs away and replace us with robots, hopefully. So
Brilliant. That's grand. Thank you so much, Lindsay. We're
no
gonna
worries.
stop there. That's bang on time, so perfectly
Thank
done.
you.
Massive thank you to you for sharing your knowledge and insight. Thanks to everybody else for attending. We've now got a bit of a break in the schedule for a few weeks, but our next webinar in the series will be welcoming William Forrest, who will be giving a talk on driving diversity within the automotive industry. So that's an Arnold Clark case study, and that's going to be on the 14th of November. So you can get signed up today. Jillian will pop the link in the chat. So thanks very much, and hope everybody has a great week. Cheers now.